What's up, gamers? So today I'm going to be doing part 1 of my guide on armor versus health in League of Legends. Today we're going to be talking about damage reduction for armor and how this stacks up against health. What I'm going to be trying to show you is how you can think of armor and health and how they can be effective in different scenarios and how they kind of do have these similarities but also are very different, and this makes it such that one will be more effective than the other depending on your already current stats and at what stage of the game you are in. So here you can see I have this equation for damage reduction by armor. By the way, this isn't just for armor. Armor is located here in the equation, but this could be replaced for magic resist. But just for the sake of the video, I'm just going to be doing armor because it's the same formula for both, and I'm just going to be assuming all sources of damage are physical damage for the sake of video. So basically how this works is the effective damage. Now this is effective damage right here. And what effective damage means is effective damage is essentially the damage that you feel coming into you. It's the damage that is being mitigated by your armor. So that your effective damage is equal to the damage pre-mitigation that's being dealt to you, so just the raw damage an enemy deals to you, times 100 over 100 plus armor, your armor value, the amount of armor you have. So as you stack more and more armor, this denominator will get larger and larger, which makes the fraction smaller and smaller. And what this means is that you'll be multiplying this damage, this pre-mitigation damage, by a smaller and smaller number, and your effective damage being dealt to you will get smaller and smaller. Now, I have a graph representing this exact equation right here. And so basically the x-axis of this graph is the amount of armor you have. The y-axis of this graph is the percent damage that is being mitigated from your champion. So some cool things to note about this graph and that you can note while in game. At exactly 100 armor, you have exactly 50% damage reduction for physical damage. At 200 armor, you now have 66.666666 repeating percent reduction to physical damage, which is essentially 2/3 of your damage is being reduced. And finally, at 300 armor, which you have to be real tanky to get here, you will have exactly 75% reduction. So that's kind of how armor works. And as you can see, this is a graph of essentially diminishing returns. It's concave down, meaning that the slope is positive but constantly decreasing. What this means is the farther along the curve or the more armor you buy, the change in the percent mitigation of damage is going to get smaller and smaller. You see 10 armor over here, say if you go from 10 to 20 armor, that's going to be a lot more percent change than say if you go from 200 to 210. That's a much less steep curve right there. So that's going to be less worthwhile. So what this essentially means is your early armor purchases are worth much more than later ones. So getting armor early is always more effective, essentially. So that's one thing you can think of while in game. Now, we can actually use this formula to show ourselves different scenarios while in game. And I'm going to pose a scenario right now, actually. So, say you are an early game Orianna. You're a level 6 Orianna. And what this essentially means is that you are up against a very challenging, hard to play against Zed. He's really doing a lot of damage to you. Obviously, he's full physical damage, so armor is what you'd be looking to buy. But I pose a question. If you're going back for your first buy, what do you want to buy, a ruby crystal or an armor? Now, aside from the price difference, ruby crystal does cost 100 gold more. Which of the raw stats of those two items is more effective for your given situation? That's really the question. So if we have a level 6 Orianna, her base armor in this case is 28.89. I'm going to assume she doesn't have armor and runes and doesn't already have an armor item. Now, if she buys the cloth armor, this will increase her armor by 15, which means armor will increase to 43.89 because you added 15. Now the question is it worth getting this increase over the 150 flat health of Ruby Crystal? Well, we can use our graph right here to figure this out. So we started with 28.89 armor. And if we go on the graph to 28.89, which is about 28.9, we see we have 22.42% reduction, which is the Y value at that point in the graph. So this is 22.42% reduction. And now, if we go over to 43.89, which is pretty much 43.9, we have 30.507% reduction. And so, as you can see, this is a decent increase in the percent reduction. The difference here, which is the real value we're looking for, is 8.087%. So effectively, this 15 armor is giving us an additional 8.087% mitigation of physical damage. So if Zed deals 100 damage to you, you'll now be basically only 92 damage will be dealing to you with the plus 15 armor if you only had the 28 armor. So with 43 armor, you're essentially only dealing 92 for every 100 damage the 28 armor will be being dealt to you. Now, how can we figure out if this 8% reduction is worth getting over a Ruby Crystal? Well, we can use a little mathematical maneuver over here where we do 150 to represent the amount of HP in a Ruby Crystal divided by the decimal value of this percent. And what this gives us is a value. Now this value that I'm putting up is the pre-mitigation damage value of damage you're gonna have to take in order to save yourself 150 damage with your additional cloth armor value. So you'd have to take 1854.83 damage in order to actually get 150 HP value out of that additional armor. That is a decent amount of damage, but this is pre-mitigation, of course, because we haven't actually factored the armor into this value. This is just the value where an 8% change will be 150 damage. So if we actually do the calculations, with 28.8 armor, you can plug this into this equation up here. And I already did this math, but basically what you get is with 28.8 armor, basically this amount of damage being dealt to you would actually be 1438.97. And then if you had 43.89 armor, plugged it into this equation and found out what the amount of actual damage with 43.89 armor is with this amount of damage being dealt to you, the actual amount of damage being dealt to you post mitigation would be 1288.97. Now, one thing you might notice here, the difference between these two numbers is exactly 150, which makes sense because this would be the 8% change we calculated for this for these two values. And we found that this is the value where an 8% change, or 8.087 change, would be 150 health. So effectively, what this means is this is the change in damage that would have to be dealt to you in order to save 150 health. So Orianna would have to be dealt this much damage in order to save 150 health with that plus 15 armor from the cloth armor. Now, what does this mean? Well, Orianna's base HP is actually 889.45 at level 6. So that's her base HP. Now, she might have like a Doran's Ring, maybe health runes, but for sake of argument, I'm just going to exclude those for now. And so pretty much, she would have to be actually dealt about, what, 400 damage over her actual HP bar with that cloth armor to actually make back the amount of health a ruby crystal would be getting her. So unless Zed's going to poke her down and she's going to regen about 400 HP, it's really actually more worth in this situation to get the ruby crystal. So there's two things at play here. First of all, you have to know if you're going to get poked down or not, because armor is more effective over time. The more damage that's being dealt to you, the more that armor will, mitigate the damage that's being dealt, and the more that the armor will make up for the health loss that you could be buying health. And the other thing at play here is that you actually have to realize like how much HP you already have. Since Orianna is only at 889 health, she is going to have to be dealt a lot of damage for that armor to actually be worth it. Another thing you can realize here is that, as we can see on this curve, Orianna's pretty, in the steeper section of the curve. If she's like completing a Zhonya's out here, it's going to be even less worthwhile for that armor. So like if she already had armor and stuff, this percentage change would actually be a lower number because she'd already have more armor. And since this would be a lower percentage change, then this number would be smaller here, and this number right here would be bigger. So she would have to take more damage to make up that 150 HP she could just be getting from a ruby crystal. So I just wanted to show you with this kind of lesson on effective damage and how damage mitigation works, that in a lot of scenarios, flat HP can be worth it if you're not being dealt damage over time. If you're expecting burst, if you're thinking that that's the main mode by which you could die in lane, flat HP a lot of times can be more worth it just because of the raw stat it gives you, while armor generally takes more damage on you in order to be more effective. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something.